Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're really excited. Today's title is going to be Capturing Knowledge Strategies for Preserving Enterprise Expertise. We have a tremendous panel of experts with us here today, coming from different organizations of different sizes, representing different teams, different functions, but make no mistake, everyone here is an expert and in the business of knowledge management. When we talk about knowledge management, a good question is, what do we mean by that? Certainly, we don't mean an intranet. We don't mean internal documentation. Those are outputs. Those are artifacts of knowledge management work, but certainly not a definition of the term. Jonathan, who we'll introduce in a few minutes, along with everyone else, wrote a piece recently that speaks to the 3 pillars of knowledge management. And I really like this as a way to think about the subject matter. Knowledge management can be thought of as partly knowledge search. How are we finding knowledge and information that we need in the workplace? Knowledge upkeep. How are we making sure that that knowledge, which largely resides in people's heads, is documented and is organized in a way that even allows for search? And then knowledge retention. How do we make sure that we manage and keep our knowledge and make it efficient and effective to reach, and don't lose that when people leave the organization for any reason, retirement, regrettable, non-regrettable. In all cases, how do we make sure that the knowledge stays with the organization and is accessible to the employees who need it? We've had lots of conversations. This group has met earlier and really excited for some of the specific examples, concrete actions that some of these organizations are taking to manage that. And we really want to focus on that last piece of knowledge retention today. Before we get into the weeds of the subject, let's quickly do some introductions. And so my name is Adam Tanner. I'm the Senior Director of Employee Experience Products at NRC Health. I'm also an advisor to PairUp, and so I've been working with the PairUp team for a while now, and really excited about this conversation to understand not just how technology, when we think about the products and how technology can support this, but what are all the behaviors and cultural aspects of knowledge management need to be true for this to be a successful outcome for our organizations. With that, I'd like to pass to Badu. Would you mind introducing yourself? And maybe if you could share a little bit of your perspective on knowledge management, just 30 seconds, that'd be a great way to start.
Thank you very much, Adam. My name is Badu Busso. I'm knowledge manager at the CMPA, the Canadian Medical Protective Association in Ottawa, Canada. I have 15 years experience in working in knowledge management and in designing KM solutions and in business process improvement. I hold a certification as certified knowledge manager, and also I'm a certified knowledge specialist in information architecture. The Canadian Medical Protective Association is the largest medical association for doctors in Canada. And it works very hard on ensuring that doctors, provide safe medical care, and it provides some educational resources to doctors. So it's a very old organization as well. My perspective on knowledge management, I always think of knowledge management as getting the right knowledge to the right people at the right time. And also identifying know how, know who, know where. Know how, the knowledge you use. Know where is that knowledge located, and know who holds the knowledge. And I think we'll get into that with the retention and capture that you've been talking about.
Amazing. Thank you, Badu. Cynthia, would you mind going next?
Sure. Thank you, Adam. So my name is Cynthia Brendamour, and I'm from Sun Life. I'm located in Montreal, Canada, and I've been with Sun Life for the past 25 years. Started when I was 12. 15 of those years have been dedicated to knowledge management. So over my course here at Sun Life, I've helped large business areas implement knowledge management frameworks, using various tools to help build knowledge bases so employees have an easy time of finding their knowledge. I am also a certified knowledge manager. I am a certified information architect. I am a certified knowledge specialist as well, in knowledge capture and retention and implementing KI in the world of Agile. So I've spent various years talking about knowledge management at my company and what it means to me. So KM is very near and dear to my heart. And in the last little while, I've had the opportunity to actually talk about how knowledge management corresponds with generative AI. So to me, it is the motor that runs the car. And if your motor doesn't function, your car won't move. So it's not a project. Knowledge management is something that we need to start implementing as more of a methodology, something we need to do in every day of our life. And it's not just putting everything in a SharePoint, it's understanding where your documents are, how they coexist, how do people get to them, so on and so forth. So it's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Cynthia. We're going to use that analogy again later, I think, the
problem.
motor in the car. Iris, would you mind going next?
Sure. Although it's so difficult to follow both of you. So hi, I'm Iris McQuillan-Grace. I'm the global head of employee experience at Oliver. We're an advertising agency with about 5,000 employees across 46 countries. And prior to that, I spent 3 years at the Center for Reproductive Rights. My experience with knowledge management is really more boots on the ground and more tactical, right? So I'm hoping to sort of lift in how we partner with specialists to not leave, to bring that at the beginning of the conversation and to habit stack across as we think about employee experience. How are we including early, often, and always knowledge management across the employee journey, partnering with those stakeholders, considering, and reprioritizing, bringing it, sort of in the way that I always get this vision of like my grandmother just being like, don't forget, and just like, don't forget, right? Which is so much of our work as HR professionals anyway. So really making sure that it's part of the holistic and inclusive way we're designing our cultures and environments for our employees to thrive in. And knowledge management is such a critical piece that I'm excited to get into, right? From everything though, from how we're recruiting people to onboarding people, when we're developing people, when we're exiting people, right? So I think what's exciting about this conversation in particular, and hopefully some of those actions and outputs, right, that Adam, we're going to leave folks with, are some ways to really integrate this approach so it doesn't feel siloed, that it can be a really connected conversation.
Absolutely. Knowledge management at every step of the employee journey, not only opportunities for knowledge sharing, but opportunities and risk of knowledge leakage. And we'll get into some real concrete things of how to solve for that today. And Jonathan, would you mind going next?
Sure thing. Jonathan Geibel, head of product at PairUp. I'm in Seattle, Washington. And yeah, we are focused on building knowledge management tools. The past year, we've spent a lot of time on semantic search, which is obviously a core component, and doing things to make sure we identify people as well as information, so people can connect to whether the information is documented or connect to the right person. But now moving forward beyond semantic search, trying to figure out how AI can help with other areas of knowledge management, like document upkeep, capturing knowledge in the first place, and really digging into those problem areas and figuring out how AI can make those more efficient.
Thanks, Jonathan. So to get us started, as we focus in on this topic of capturing or retaining knowledge, I think it's important to understand, what do we mean by that? One term that comes up a lot in our conversations is key person risk. And I wonder if we couldn't, just to get the flow going, go around and have each person speak to kind of how they define key person risk, how that looks in your organization, and then we'll start getting into what can we do about it. Because I think the problem, there's lots of problems and challenges to solve as it relates to every aspect of knowledge management. But this, what happens when our great people leave the organization, or even what happens when a great person leaves one role and moves to another role? How are we not losing all that expertise that they have stored up inside their brain? So I don't know, anyone want to volunteer to go first?
I'll go first. I think
Thanks,
it's important. I identify key person risks as key person. Let's define key person. I think a key person is someone who holds critical knowledge. So the word critical is really important. They hold critical knowledge because of their tenure. They have been with the organization for quite a while. They've moved around. They know the culture, and they have garnered a lot of know-how. It could be someone who's very talented and just is an expert in their field, and that's how they become critical. Why are they critical? They're critical because when you lose them, then you are stuck with a lot of problem. Three things that we need to retain. Three things happen in organizations: replacements, rotations, retirements. And that's usually when you see that somebody is critical. When they decide to leave, then well, it's if they get replaced, they may be asked to leave or they leave on their own. If they rotate, it's because they're moving to a different position within the organization. If they retirement, it's a fact of life. They retire, it's a fact of life. So it happens. In any case, you need to make sure that their knowledge is captured so that you prevent loss, because that's very critical. So that's how I would frame it to get us started.
And I agree with Badu, right? So like we need to look at what is the knowledge that the person holds. So when we look at and I feel that a lot of companies just target retirees, right? There are people, oh my God, they're leaving in 5 months. We just realized it. What do we do? But there's also a fear with the rotating employees, because a person who's been in a role for 15 years, who's brought all that valuable knowledge and it's in their head and they pick up today and tomorrow they start a new role, they're like, well, they're still in the company, but can you get access to them? And will, the new role allow for that? And I think, it's not just system knowledge, it's all kinds of knowledge. And I think there's a big, there's sometimes it's like you're just focused on, well, this person knows this system, so that's all we need to focus on. And it's like, well, no, because how does that system impact this system, which then impacts this department, that then impacts that person? So key knowledge resonates throughout different people. And sometimes we get tunnel vision and we just focus on one thing when we really need to kind of assess the 3 R's that Badu spoke about, and then address the impact of all of them. And I think a key thing is that more and more companies now are looking to forecast. So who am I losing in 2024, 25, 26, 28? We are. So we are building something that allows us to forecast years down the road to say, today you have one SME, subject matter expert. In 2026, you need to have 3, and here's that gap, right? And it's not just this piece of information. It's going through and saying, this is everything this role does. Identify your critical, identify your people attached to that. And I think in the past couple of years with, Gen AI and all this stuff, a lot of this key knowledge and key people has come to a forefront, because what are you feeding your Gen AI? It's that key knowledge that resides in people's heads.
But I think the other thing that I just heard that I love, right, is that we're attaching that forecasting to workforce planning, right? So we're marrying these pieces together, but having that sort of conscious awareness and that intentionality behind it, I think really ladders into some of these other outputs that I'm seeing more broadly across, right? Around talent management practices, leaning into skill taxonomy, and how are we marrying those things and identifying what's critical, and sort of, lining up a lot of these discussions. The piece I do want to call out, though, when we think about key person risk that potentially feels like a value add to this, is there are the skills and then there are the relationships. And that more intangible, amorphous, right? There is the how we get work done, and then there's the how we get work done. And that piece, I think also we see from the talent development space when we think about rotation. Yeah, but the relationships are so strong. That's the piece we can't replace. I can get them, right? And that part also feels maybe a little stickier. It's not as transactional at all, but it was really imperative for us to get right, because we will see exit if we stop people moving from that rotation, right? And to be successful. And that part around how do we get those intangibles? How do we get those relationships? I have geniuses in this room with me. How are we making sure? Is there AI for that? Is there a checklist for that? Right? Those sort of softer pieces, right? That's the part that I think when we think about classifying key and critical skills and key people in the business, there are also some of those things, not even client facing, but internally, those relationships of people who can get things done.
So I know for
Okay.
me, Iris, like in our knowledge transfers that we started building with some of our seniors, you have your technical stuff. But then I need to know, what does your day-to-day look like? So tell me about a typical day. And then tell me about the people I need to care about. Because if you take a vacation and I need to contact Bob, how do I know I need to contact Bob? And not only, but how do I contact, but why do I contact him? So I know, like, when I did a lot of interviews with, retirees that are coming up, it was, well, Cynthia, I want to tell you everything I know, but I don't know what you want to know. So right there is like, okay, we need to get into their heads and ask them the right questions. So, I also ask soft skills. So what is the soft skills required for this role? So you're a system, you're a developer, and that's great, but what, because if you're going to put a successor in the role, how do we make sure that successor is successful? And do they have the skills to maintain relationships, both in and outside? So I think when we go down this, really interesting road of knowledge capture, we can't just ask a senior, okay, tell me everything you need to know. We need to give them some, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the ways to give us what we need. So one of them is, your job, the people we need to, the soft skills. And then if the successor doesn't have that, then it's a gap. So how do you address that gap? Because not only now do you need to fill their, knowledge of the system, you also need to work on the soft skills and coach for that. So I know for us, when we do knowledge transfers, we do have a big portion that is, asking about some of those relationships and all that kind of stuff. Because if you just focus on, the system and this is how we fix this error, you're not going to get a well-rounded candidate in that role.
Yeah, I think
And-
that, oh, sorry, go ahead, Adam.
Nope, please continue, Iris.
No, I think that's such a critical call out, because at prior orgs, knowledge management has felt so separate and has over-indexed on those technical pieces. And to your point, leaves gaps. And so not only are we talking now about workforce planning and knowledge management, but the training needs identified after the fact, right? And so this real holistic approach feels like what has to come next in order for us to stay agile, right? And I'm excited to hear that other people are doing that too, because
Just
it
one
is.
thing on that, though, Iris.
Yeah.
So it also helps us understand if the job that we're posting for today should be the same as what it was 20 years ago when that job first started.
100%, 100%, right? And that's that workforce planning piece of, are we
Yeah.
looking for the future? Are we getting to
Yep.
the tomorrow? Are the skills we need now the same skills?
Yep.
Right? What is worth holding on to from a knowledge management
Yep.
perspective? Yeah,
Yep.
100%.
And we're starting to talk about a little bit different types of knowledge and what we can document easily, what is more difficult to document. And then, of course, as you talk about transfer, once it's documented, how are we training, upskilling, making sure that knowledge is actually transferred to somebody else. But Badu, I think it was you that we were speaking the other week, and we were talking about tacit versus implicit knowledge.
Yeah.
Would you
Yeah,
mind giving us
it is
the
really
lowdown there?
interesting. Yeah, so there are different types of knowledge, and so explicit, which is what you would find in procedures and job aids and instructions. Yeah, those are written, and you'd find them easily in knowledge bases or knowledge hubs. And then you have implicit knowledge. Implicit knowledge starts bringing a little bit of experience. When you have an instruction or when you have a procedure and you start using it, you're gaining a little bit of experience doing it. Let's say I'll just take something very simple, how to navigate a CRM system. So, the instructions are there. Go here, A, go here, B, do this, C, jump there, and you have all of it. But start using it and implementing it, applying it. You see that there's a little more that you need to know. That's the experience. That's the implicit part of it. Now, tacit, you can't really put your finger on it because it's a fleeting thing. I call it a fleeting thing. It's the thing that you need to hang out with the person in order to get it. You have to talk to the person. And this actually allows me to go back to what I think it was Iris that brought it up, relationship building. You have to put people at the center of it. Connections. People connect. When people connect, they start sharing knowledge. And there's this important concept in knowledge management. It's called connect and collect. You connect people and you connect dots. You know, when you connect people, you start creating relationships. You know, when you connect dots, you start, you know, collecting knowledge. You know, so and that's how you start building your corpus. But I think we'll get into the solutions in terms of how to extract or how to elicit that tacit knowledge. There are many ways of doing it, but it starts with people at the center having a vibrant culture of knowledge sharing, of a willingness to learn, and that's really how you get it going.
Fantastic. Jonathan, as I hear everyone speaking, I think of it from a product development standpoint, and you know, same thing. It's not just capturing process requirements, but how are we sitting with people, listening, reading between the lines, understanding their experience beyond what they can articulate. Because as you said, tacit knowledge, even if you said, Adam, you know, share this, it would be difficult for me to articulate or write down exactly what it is that I think you're looking for, right? It's something that has to almost be sensed. Jonathan, would you say a little bit about how you all think about that, right? It's easy to search and use technology against easily documented things, but what about the stuff that's still in people's heads that's not documentable?
Yeah, I think tacit knowledge, you know, especially like I look at it as like these are the intuitions people are building up. Like you said, like as you use a CRM system, you know, that you start building up intuitions about how to most effectively use it. Those are really, really hard to document, probably impossible to document. And when key person risk, when they leave, you're losing a lot of that intuition that the person has. I like the idea of like the best way of capturing that is to pair people up, not to use a pun with our name, but to get people to connect, work together, and so that when you do that, that intuition starts getting spread around. So it's less about, you know, rote just documentation of things and more about connecting the right people and getting that part of it transferred. And then just to say something others have said of like, for me, it's like about the non-tacit knowledge, the actual docket, you know, the explicit documentation, you know, then it gets to like ROI. Like you could ask everybody to document everything you ever know, but that's extremely expensive for an organization. So how do we help identify like what are the actual like most important business needs that aren't documented today that should be documented, or on the key person risk, if there's one of a person, how do we get that person probably paired up with others and start documenting their areas? Because if that one person leaves, obviously they're going to leave with most of that documentation and knowledge. So identifying where these gaps are and putting resources into those areas and make it a little more tangible instead of thinking about everything everywhere.
For sure. We've been kind of playing around in the theoretical a little bit, and I think it's a good time to shift to real, you know, what's happening in your organizations. What actions are you taking to combat this knowledge loss and maximize knowledge retention? Cynthia, would you, I know you're doing some pretty interesting things. Would you mind kicking us off?
So, and I think, you know, when we talk about capturing tacit knowledge from retirees, we need to end the stigma of we're going to take what you have and then we're going to throw you out. And so people knowledge hoard. And knowledge hoarding is because people are so afraid to share because they're like, well, if I share, then you don't need me. So I think there's some soft messaging that needs to happen when companies start down the road of, you know, really investing in KM to get that tacit or all of that knowledge, right? Where we need that knowledge so that we don't heavily rely on you. So you can take a vacation and you can take a sabbatical and you can enjoy retirement without us kind of knocking on your door. And I know for us, there's a lot of new things that we've been trying, right? So I've just wrapped up a 14-week pilot with one of my areas where we introduced them to content inventories, where the content that was there helped us understand, you know, is it critical? So they're all like, well, you know, why? And I'm like, well, if it's critical and it doesn't exist, then we know we need to document it. Or if it's there and it's critical and it's old, it needs to be updated. Where we introduced, you know, audit workshops. So going through and looking at the content, because it's all well and good that we have all this documentation, but do you really understand the state of your documentation? Right? I could have a really beautiful closet full of clothes. Does it mean I wear it all the time? Probably not. So we need to get into the habit of weeding our content to understand, how much we have, what does it look like, is it what we need? To Jonathan's point, documentation is expensive. So if we're just documenting for documenting, then what are we doing? You're not helping anything. And then, part of that was working in the Gen AI field and developing a pattern that will allow us to interview retiring employees. So going in, asking them questions and, giving them that, this is what we kind of want from you, but then getting it to a point where it's more conversational and allowing them to story tell. So one of the best ways to knowledge share is to allow a senior to story tell. And we learn by storytelling, right? Because it's not something that's applicable, but it's something down the road that we can maybe refer to. So we're working on something like that, and it's coming along. I've asked for, ways that we can pause it, because guess what? Just because I say I'm going to do this for an hour on Friday doesn't mean I'll complete it, because my phone's going to ring. And I'm one of the subjects. So even though, I'm not retiring, I have been with Sun Life for 25 years. I've been all over the company. So, there's a lot of knowledge I hold in my head for tools and all this kind of stuff. And then, looking at semantic search. So I know Jonathan talked a little bit about that, and kind of looking to see how a semantic search with knowledge graphs and ontologies and taxonomies can really help us. So one of the things we face, like many companies, is I can't find what I'm looking for. And even though we've created a content strategy where this document goes here and this document goes here, new hires are not going to know this. So how can we use, Gen AI and KM and its fundamentals to put them together to give someone a search bot that will retrieve what they're looking for, kind of moving away from chatbots and vector databases and that kind of stuff. And then the information we collect from those seniors is, human in the loop. So they can review it, make sure what was captured, even though it's run through an LLM, it's, it's what they're saying, and then store that and have people get access to that. Using, by the way, we're full of jargon at Sun Life. Love this company, but we use jargon a lot. New hires don't know what jargons are. So when it returns the search, it gives you alternate names of what it is that we're referring to, because, when you're storytelling, especially if it's me, I talk a lot. Will use jargons, and I will use acronyms that maybe new hires are not accustomed to. So these are some of the things that we're, pushing the boundaries on to help capture that knowledge. It's become, a need to get retirees information, but the proper information. And, a lot of them, like I've talked to, they're like, well, Cynthia, I recorded 150 hours of video. Okay. So what do we do with that, right? So if you're not guiding them, what are they giving us? They're either giving us information, but is it the information we need? And then, tying it back to the critical, the inventories and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of, full circle. And what do we have? What are we missing? How do we capture? How do we ensure what we're capturing is retrievable and meaningful for the user?
Love it. And then as you were saying, we can take that knowledge from those instances and feed it right back into new hire onboarding, getting people up to speed quicker, ensuring that not only are we capturing the knowledge, but we're transferring it, whether that's the person having a question and being able to use semantic search to find the answer to their question, or perhaps it's being delivered through training and different development initiatives. I don't know, Iris, I don't want to put you on the spot, but as you think about that employee experience, what does that look like from your angle?
Yeah. So I would say to go sort of where we are, to go all the way back, right? Because before you can get down to the nitty gritty of identifying the skills, capturing the skills, transferring the skills, the buy-in, I think, is the place that we are currently at, right? And sort of doing that, and like, we are walking and you are sprinting, right? In comparison. And hopefully that's helpful for some people listening, right? And engaging with this, right? Because, we are confirming what our taxonomies look like and those naming conventions. We are starting from here, right? And that journey, I think, is bringing our stakeholders along in a way that is very valuable from a storytelling perspective, because it's bringing them up to speed. Because as we continue to grow and we bring on particularly new leaders, which was the use case for us, and this is sort of getting to the long way to the learning and development, sort of the transfer piece, right? Is if I had approached stakeholders and said, hey, we need to be putting, more focus on knowledge management, and this is how we're going to do it through training, I would have gotten blank, 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 blank. What is that? And so in order to get the output, right, bringing everybody along and saying, this is what we're losing. Literally, this is what we're losing. And this is the impact, right? So establishing that ROI, even before we get to running the sort of, the exercises themselves, has been critical for us to sort of lay the foundation. It's also created quite a wide understanding and awareness now. There's a lot of work to be done. And that, I think, is where this transfer piece can kick in to say, great, while we're building the car, we're still going to drive it because people are still leaving. We're still upskilling. People are joining. We still need to solve for that. And we have, and sort of, I sound like I'm just beating the same drum here, but the real way that we've been able to anchor and pilot some of these ways of doing that is through the transfer piece across the touch points on the employee lifecycle. So it isn't seen as this standalone project that is extra. So we're bringing it in. So when we think about onboarding, critical things you need to know for your role, first 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, that first, really that first year for us, right? And then as we think about what that rotation piece looks like, right? What are those key things? So we're bracketing it in those moments right now. So we're focusing more on the transfer, right? And identifying sort of, we're sort of mushing those pieces, I think, in comparison to the ways that Cynthia and Badu have been speaking about. But the practical application of that, when you don't have the resources and there's no knowledge management team and we're bringing these things together, maybe there are some people on here who are like, yes, that's also me, because you don't want it to walk out the door, but you also have lots going on. And so keeping it in the conversation, getting those early wins, and this is where the learning and development piece comes in, right? So that was all this sort of context for this example that I'm going to sort of lift, right? We've just done a training needs, or like an annual training needs assessment for one of our regions. And what was phenomenally identified was on the job training as a preferred methodology for our organization. And so now I'm able to connect the dots of hashtag knowledge management is the way to, right? And so as we craft our training strategies, we can now further prioritize this, right? So wherever you are, if you, like me, we're also feeling intimidated by these very well set up and resourced individuals, right? We're from here, right? So I hear what you're doing, Badu, and I hear, Cynthia, what you're doing. And I will, I was super intimidated because I was like, oh, we're at the beginning, right? But I hope that other people on this call, like me, are feeling really inspired to acknowledge where you are on the journey, that there's always a place to start, right? Because hopefully 3 years from now, if we do this again, I can come back and say, and now we've got the resources and we've demonstrated we've got the business case to demonstrate why to add resource to this, the way this is going to help us, perform better as a company, but also as employees, right? That's the other piece that I come back to, right? That's the other reason why this really matters to me and my team, is because my North Star for my particular role is, how are we really empowering people to do their best? And you can't do that if we haven't set them up for success. So for me, knowledge management has so much a part of the employee experience and the fabric of how we create culture that you cannot separate these conversations any longer.
And just on that, Iris, so I am a team of one. It's taken me 15 months to get to the pilot. We are not a separate chapter. My full-time role is PO of Confluence Cloud, but I've gotten the attention of the CIOs to say knowledge is important, and they're starting to see that. So the journey you've been on, I've been there for about 12 years now, trying to get KM recognized as something that we need to do. So I feel the pain. I'm excited that I got the opportunity for this pilot. My North Star is to get a chapter set up of KM with some resources so we can, help areas kind of not just do one piece, because a lot of people just focus on one piece, but everything you just talked about, CAM, how it impacts training, how it impacts people like employees development. But my journey has been quite long for everyone listening on the call. Quite excited I was given the opportunity, but I think education is key. Like the more people know, the more they kind of understand it. And a lot of people have their own, makeshift in their head of what KM is. And when you actually get into what, Badu talked about, tacit, explicit, organic, the different types of knowledge, people percolate. Feel like, oh, I just thought it was a document in SharePoint. I'm like, no, part of it. So I think education is key too. But the journey, I feel you, Iris. I'm on it. Me, driving that boat and, banging my sandwich board of how important KM is. And of course, in the Gen AI field of where we're starting, how they go hand in hand, motor that pulls the car. So
Yeah.
I was also going to make Iris feel better. You're
Oh, I
not
didn't mean
alone.
to. I really would.
No,
Okay. Well,
no, I
thank
mean,
you.
everybody goes through that journey. And it's funny, like at first when people hear about knowledge management, like KM what or knowledge what? So at some point you would just have to do knowledge management without mentioning it. Insert yourself in the conversation, be in places so you can know what's going on and what you can do, and you just start with baby steps. You use something like a concept that's really important: quick wins.
Mhm.
Doug Weiner, who is whom I call one of the KM sages, calls them squirrels. As opposed to KM bulls. KM bulls are
Mhm.
big projects where you announce everywhere that you're going to do this project, as opposed to just piloting something, and in a localized manner, and you start working on it. So and I think that's the way to do it. You engage people, and you start working on those quick wins, and you start showing them the money. ROI.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
here, so it's working, and that's how you do it. Our journey is kind of similar to what Cynthia said in terms of, how are we trying to capture tacit knowledge and, not letting people walk out the door and all of that. We've been kind of toying around with, succession planning. We're just experimenting with this. And my approach is that, there are two approaches actually. What I call a proactive approach and a reactive approach. The reactive approach is when people announce that they're leaving and then you have to do something. You're compelled to do something. But the most beneficial or impactful approach is the proactive one. And it starts with onboarding. Like Cynthia said, you start pairing people up from the get-go. No pun intended. You can do that through mentorships. You can do that through conversations. You can do that through communities of practice. There are several ways you can create those connections so that people learn. If you learn from people, it's more impactful than learning from machines. What I mean by that, just reading something off a screen is not going to do it, because you want that intuition that Jonathan was talking about. So that's what we've been doing, and how technology can help us in the end, because we're not there yet, but we can see the possibility is using AI to because you do those interviews and you have those conversations, for example, with people that are departing. What do you do with all of that knowledge? What do you do with all of that data? It's amazing data. A human being cannot sift through it. You need AI's help to do that, and that's where we see opportunities using AI and prompting the right way.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that you just made me think about is tailoring the transfer for your audience. Right? I think we also potentially make the automatic assumption that this knowledge, because we value it, is going to be automatically valuable to the person we're hoping will pick it up. And I think that's where, right, we're sort of thinking through learning styles or the way that we tailor these, sort of the transfer strategy, right, around this is really, is certainly a place that I place a lot of my focus and attention, because that's what my experience is in, right? Is how to make it, learning something that you can really retain, right? And those behavioral outcomes or those knowledge outcomes. And I think that's the part that is we're potentially farther ahead on, because we already have that culture established, right? But I think that piece that marriage of the AI, but also sort of being able to walk through and say, not just because it's functional related, but also like, are we taking into consideration the learning styles, like neurodivergent individuals who may not metabolize information in one way, right? Someone who may need particular access needs. Are we thinking about those transfer needs in a holistic way so that we don't spend all this time capturing the knowledge and only disseminating it or expecting the transfer to happen in this one environment? And are we offering enough, as you say, sort of this on the job, like reinforcement points, right? And the tension in that is, right, like the knowledge doesn't stay static, right? So like, how are we sort of like navigating that space is, I won't lie, she keeps me up at night. But
You talked about storytelling, and I think that's really important. Usually when you hear about storytelling, it's about data storytelling. But data is part of knowledge anyways, as you know, it was data first and then information, which is data in context, and then knowledge. You add knowledge, which is experience, learning through experience. But I think storytelling is important in knowledge management too. And one thing that I learned not too long ago is that when telling a story, keep it simple. I think one of you mentioned it earlier, and know your audience. So you know your audience, you keep it simple. And this also makes me think of content, how we present content. We like the traditional procedure, which has the purpose and all of that, the rules and responsibilities. So not all learners like that. They may not want to sit there and then read through like a couple of pages of that. Some may prefer having an infographic. It may just be more better suited to their way of learning. So I think having all options on the table makes a lot of sense. If you have someone who's more infographic prone, you give it to them. If you have someone who likes reading a lot, you give it to them too. So but knowing your audience and the type of learner that you're dealing with is really, really, really important. Just wanted to add that.
Oh, go ahead, Ira.
Go ahead. No.
Okay. So I was just going to talk about that. I do. So excited. So I just finished certification program for writers. And the reason why we do this is because if I ask Iris to document something, Iris is just going to, okay, I'm going to open up my Word and I'm going to start typing. And we write for us, when in the reality is the people consuming the content is not us. So when I spoke about exactly what Badu just said, knowing your audience, eye-opener, and I trained my team, which was a little intimidating, but, I asked them questions. I was like a 5-year-old, but why? But Cynthia, we're going to do this, but why? And so when you remove yourself from the content, you open up your content to be able to reach your audience, primary, secondary, tertiary. But not only that, but structuring is good and it's important, right? So if I'm an expert user, like Badu said, I'm not going to read through 60 pages. I'm going to scan, but is my content scannable? But if I'm a new hire, I'm probably going to go with my finger, go down step 1 to 20, make sure I'm doing it right because I'm new. So understanding your audience, structuring your content, whether it's a developer guide, a feature guide, a procedure note, it actually impacts how your audience absorbs. And we all know today, nobody reads, everybody scans. And, everybody comes with an expectation when they're doing a search that the document they open is going to answer their question. So it comes back to, why do we need relevant titles? Why do we need relevant metadata tagging when people are searching, right? And like all of this was an eye opener, but it's so impactful when we talk about content. So great, you've storytell, you've captured it, now what? I'm just going to throw it into wherever we're posting it. Even if we put it through LLM and all of that, it still needs to be in a way that is then absorbable by the audience. And sometimes we lose sight of that. Sometimes it's just we write for us and we also write how we speak. So I always use the example. Imagine if I wrote how I spoke, big documentation. So it's getting people to change kind of what we're documenting and then understanding who we're documenting for. So if a new hire is coming on board, what do they need to know? What do they care about? And I find sometimes it's difficult because people who've been, with our company 30, 40, 50 years, they like to give the backstory. And it's always hard to say, 1970 was a long time ago. We don't need to go that far back, right? So sometimes we have to also guide when they're storytelling, when you're, capturing whatever it is, because what you produce is so important. So, I always ask the question, okay, we've captured, now what?
So
What do you do with it?
one of the things that we've started to do sort of on this, right? Like, who is your audience and how to know, right? So the benefit of being in HR is that I have the data to say, okay, great. Like, what do our employee segments look like? What do our audiences really look like from a data perspective, right? So thinking through how we sort of launch that content and disseminate and create the content that's going to land the most effectively with our learners. The piece that I want to call out, I'm not sure if anybody's done this or considered doing this, is we have started to build employee journey maps and employee personas. And those have been incredibly effective in helping us not just redesign process, but consider knowledge management throughout all of the employees. So we've mapped those moments that matter. We've mapped the employee journeys. We've created these employee personas. And part of that employee persona are the tools that they'll need. And so it helps us with this forecasting, but it also helps us see those points of knowledge management across the employee lifecycle and those opportunities to build training, but also all of the places where we can reinforce those opportunities to transfer knowledge as well. Where are we capturing, but then where are we also reinforcing, right? Because I wonder if I think sometimes there's the expectation that you learn it once and then you're really done. And you're like, okay, I gave it to you. Great. You have nothing else to do in your job except learn this manual. Okay, great, bye. Right.
Yeah.
And I think this piece of the consistent reinforcement and habit stacking, right? And this is where mapping the journey and seeing them all together can be really critical to see those opportunities to say, well, if we're going to do this, then how do we do this? And here's the tone maybe for the comms. And here's the way that we should consider shaping the collateral. The piece I do want to call out, though, that's a rabbit hole. So pair early and often with your HR and learning teams if you aren't already, right? Because this is where there's real synergy in this work that we've started to see, because though we are still very much in the place of we're doing it, but we're not calling it by name, right? It is critical in order for us to be successful as a business
Yeah,
and for our employees to feel like we've set them up for success.
On that though, I know a lot of times I hear, but you should know this. So when
Oh,
somebody
if I
says,
had
"Hey,
a
you should
job.
know this," and I'm like, okay, but tell me how and why. Well, when you join Sun Life, I'm like, I joined Sun Life in 1999. We didn't have email. So when I help people write or when I give the class, I talk about assumptions. And I think we need to remove assumptions. We need to stop assuming, A, we know what they want to see, B, the knowledge that they have, how they learn, the fast speed of what, right? So assumptions can be detrimental to content, how we set up navigation and whatever tool that we're using, taxonomies. And I'll always question, I am that annoying person that will ask you 5 whys in like 30 seconds if you say, but you should know this. And it's because we've made the assumption, like Iris said, well, when Badu joined the company, he was given our 3,000-page handbook and he's read it, so he should know it. So I think, part of the change in the culture is removing the assumption that I've been here for 25, someone who's been here for 5 months, you don't know the same thing. And they might not know, some of the things. So if I'm going to create content and fill gaps, there is content that I probably should include because I don't want to assume that they know it. And then if I don't include it, what have I done? It's a defect because now they're stopped. Now they're going to find somebody. Now they're going to ask questions. Guess what? They didn't find somebody. They couldn't ask the question. So they asked the person next to them and they've opened up OneNote. And now they've created their own set of notes that works better. So I think assumptions, we need to start removing them in a lot of the stuff in the KM world because we don't know, thinking we do.
One other piece of this puzzle that I think is interesting is creating feedback loops. So when somebody gets onboarded and spends 3 months, at the end of that, be like, what do you wish was documented? What really would have helped you during that time? That starts surfacing actual real business needs. Other people can engage with that, or in the like how something was documented. Maybe it was like the wrong format or maybe a visual would have been better. Like what would have helped you? And then really start surfacing the needs, and then that can create action.
We used to do like want versus needs. So we do like an audience needs analysis where we talk to the users, because how I build content for a call center is not the same as how I build content for my disability team. So understanding want versus needs is so important, again, because it's not about us. And I'm not an image person in my documents. We write procedure, crisp and clear. I don't feel the need of an image, because also images get outdated. We forget to go back. But then I have people who are like, no, we got to put images. And I'm like, no, it looks like a pop-up book. So, you know, when you get that feedback, whether it's through a survey, we do retros. I'm not a survey person. I like to talk to people. Tell me why my documentation is not up to par. You won't break my heart. It's going to help me make it better. So I think feedback loops are great. Understanding the want versus the need, understanding what helps people want to keep coming back. Because that's the thing. If we create documentation and no one is using it, then what are we doing? Right?
Yeah.
So,
And then, yeah. And that way, this is very much that product mindset, right? Like, you know, there is that additional sort of, I think there potentially is this, again, this sort of assumption that we all have high intrinsic motivation around knowledge management. And potentially we need some incentivization. There needs to be some why behind the why behind the why. And I think that feedback loop, Jonathan, that you raise is so critical. Also, I just want to call out, it is valuable, not just at onboarding, but at that 6 month, like tie it to performance management. At your 6 month, make it part of your check-in. At your annual, make it part of your check-in, right? Find these other opportunities so that we aren't just over indexing on when we get you and when you leave, right? Because there's a whole bunch that happens in the middle that is really critical. And I think sometimes feels a little squidgy, that we aren't quite as clear about nailing down and documenting, because to your point, Cynthia, we typically do it through, you know, through surveys, and there is survey fatigue, right? You know, and so finding those opportunities to literally, like, where you're already doing this, I've already got you for 20 minutes. I'm just going to add in these 3 questions, right? You're already doing, like, where are those moments that you can really be, you know, sort of joining forces so that we're being efficient, but effective still.
Amazing. Time is flying. We've got less than 10 minutes left, and we do have a question from the crowd. So I want to see if we can sneak one question in, and then we're going to have Emily join us for the closing as well. So this came from the audience. In places where people change roles or exit the organization in relatively big numbers, 10, 20 or more, you know, what frameworks or methodologies have you seen put in place to engage them, where it's not one-off, but it's a cohort? Do you interview all of them? How do you document their knowledge? What do you do with that knowledge? You know, I think we've touched on this a little bit, but any real examples of we've had sort of mass attrition and how we're trying to combat that and manage that?
I think this is where preparedness is very important. You remember when I talked about the proactive thing? You don't want to be reactive. Sometimes you have to be reactive because that's the fact of life. But this is why you need to have a plan in place. You have to have a plan so that if something like that happens, then you can remedy it. So it starts with the onboarding, and you know, like the checkpoints, like Iris was saying, everything that we kind of discussed. But what I would really emphasize is the importance of having a plan. Be prepared for cohorts leaving, because it may happen. Sometimes not just a cohort, it may be one person, but they're so instrumental that they're gonna things will disintegrate because of their leaving. So you need to make sure that you profile them, you document them, you capture them, and then you connect them with other people so that they leave, you know, those intuitions behind and everything. So it's a plan. It requires a plan.
And I think I would say that that forecasting also, right? Where are you partnering again with the HR team around employee engagement? Right? Where are we seeing if sentiment's tanking on a team? That might be the indicator to be proactive. Can you, you know, ask the HR team to run some stay interviews? Can you conduct those stay interviews? So you can be capturing and sort of identifying what those transfer needs are and what they would look like. Now, maybe you also get them to stay through that exercise, and wouldn't that be great? But you're sort of hitting 2 birds with 1 stone, right? This is maybe a great example of how we ladder and align these, you know, sort of processes together. Because when you have people who leave en masse like that, there are breadcrumbs. Somebody somewhere knew that was coming. And how can we be proactive, and who can we be partnering with? Because we're all one team, one dream, right? And so that's the piece that I would say. Once they're gone, if someone has solved alumni engagement, they have their own webinar for this, right? Because I don't know that many people. Now, I mean, I did spend 3 years in a mission-driven organization, and their alumni, they would do an exit interview. We have like less than 10% of our employees who will even participate in them, right? And so I don't want to say it's gone, but I don't unfortunately have a fail-safe like solve for that, because there so that's where again, I just want to double click on Badu being like, how can we be proactive? How could we get in front of it for next time? Is
So
maybe
even
the
if you
better
have a
approach.
plan though, like Badu, like, yeah, you got a plan. You also have to be two things. You need to pivot because your plan may not always work, and it needs to be a priority. And that I think is a big roadblock for a lot of companies. KM is not a priority. Knowledge capturing is not a priority. And it's, you wake up the next day and 10 people have handed in the resignation because a new company has opened up with better benefits. So, you know, be prepared, makeshift the situation so that when it, and if it does happen, you can, you know, you have a plan in place. But you need to be able to pivot because that's life, but it also has to be a priority. And that's one thing that I feel Sun Life is good at, is now, you know, they realize KM, you know, the knowledge, you got to make it a priority. People have to also know that their managers and senior management know it's a priority, because you lead by example. So, you know, it's a priority. I can schedule the time in my calendar to do the, you know, exit interview, to do the storytelling, host a panel, all that kind of stuff. But if we're not making any of this a priority, it'll never get done. And it can't be, well, we'll do it next year, because guess what? Next year, Bob just retired. And guess what? He's not an alumni who's going to come back and tell us all his little secrets. So you have your plan, you get, you know, get ready to pivot, get ready to act, you know, react like Babu said. Sometimes you just got to react, but it also has to be a priority. Everything we do in KM should have prioritization within your organization to help move it forward.
We've covered a ton of ground. We're unfortunately running out of time, but so much goodness here, right? Knowledge management as a part of our culture, tying to employee engagement. How are we hearing from and reaching out to alumni and bringing them back as boomerang employees? How can technology help with this? ROI, someone, it didn't come up today, but you know, knowledge management as IP. You know, maybe people don't care if you know, we lose the information about that process we ran, but when we think about it as this is our IP, this is our internal valuable IP, we can't lose it. People react a little differently when we have that conversation. Let's go quickly to Emily. Thank you for coming on, and then we'll close it down.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This conversation, I feel like we could have gone on for hours. It's so much good content in here. And thank you all so much for sharing and yeah, giving us your wisdom. And so we would just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of how we are working to try and solve this at PairUp. And this is going to be, we've got like a 2-minute version of this, but we'd love to chat more if you're interested in learning more about the way that our system works. And we really do believe that this is always going to be an interplay between humans and technology. So we'll show you some of the ways that we think technology can help us. So the way the system works is the first step is we really just try and help make it really easy to ingest all of the internal company knowledge that is already sitting within the organization. There's a high level of control of being able to go in and say what you want in there and what you don't want in there. So once you've gone in and kind of pulled in the pieces that you'd like, the next step is that we will go in and allow staff to really go through and search internal company knowledge. And so as you can see our system, this is someone asking, what's the status of the sales outreach project? We will first show you all of the documents that we can find that have that knowledge. We'll point you to where they are. And if there are conflicting sources, we'll show you that as well, and point you directly into the documents. But then we will also point you to the people who know more. And so kind of to Badu's point of, you know, let's get people pairing together to talk more. We will help match you to the right people so that you can connect with them and share that knowledge. Our third piece, which I think is particularly relevant to this discussion today, is we are really trying to help capture this undocumented knowledge in real time in really easy and bite-sized ways. So if I've asked this question, like, what's the best way to document a Java library? And Iris knows the answer, and Iris answers it quickly to me. We say, great, can we share that with other people who have that same question? So really trying to help in real time, as real questions are coming up, capture that knowledge. The fourth piece, which we've been really excited about too, just based on a lot of the conversations that we've gotten to have with KM leaders and also people leaders, is, there's a lot of the classic garbage in, garbage out. Like, you could sure feed an AI bot with all this knowledge, but if it's not right, that's a huge problem. And people are actually then getting wrong answers through AI. And so one of the things we've been really helping and looking at organizations, supporting in this journey of helping to make it really easy to update and kind of upkeep knowledge, and make it not just, as a routine of because it's been 3 months, but actually rooted in these documents are highly viewed and active. These are the ones that we should prioritize. These actually no one's touching, so we actually don't need to update them. We can deprioritize them. So, and then lastly, and I know we're up on time, but we're doing a lot also around data analytics and knowledge sharing, and really able to give you this knowledge more effectively, in really bite-sized ways, but also in ways so where the gaps in knowledge, where the opportunities to actually better document knowledge. And so happy to share more. Our system sits within Slack and Teams, but also we have a web app. And we're just super thrilled to get to keep also building this community. We have we'll share more afterwards, but also a knowledge management community that's really helping to support folks thinking about these topics as well. And we'd love to show you more about our product and see if we can support you as well. So thank you again so much to the panelists. Thanks to Adam for also being an amazing moderator. And it's wonderful to get to connect, and we'll follow up and also send this recording out. Amazing.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.